Hey everybody, thanks for attending today. During this webinar, we are going to be speaking to Jerod, an ex-TTP student. But before we get into that, just one announcement I want to make about Target Test Prep. I'm sure many of you know about the course. We are running a sale right now between now and the end of March, and it's a 20% off sale. I'll mention it again at the end of the interview here, but you just need to use code March20 and you'll get 20% off any of the self-study course plans. So now we can move on to the interview. So I'm super pumped. Jerod worked with us, I think about 4 or 5 months ago. He scored a 750. He has some really cool announcements about his business school plans. I'm not going to give them away. It'd be more fun if he tells everybody. But before we get into that, I think what some of you guys are probably wondering about is Jerod's background, which he can share with you and see how it relates to where you're at with everything in your career and your process with the GMAT. So Jerod, the floor is to you, and I think we can just really start with your background.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Jerod. I just found out this morning I got accepted into Wharton, so pretty pumped about that. But a little background about myself. I've spent the last 10 years within the Navy Special Operations community as an explosive ordnance disposal technician, which basically means I'm the SEALs or Special Forces bomb squad guy. I take care of mines and explosives. So a couple years ago, I was looking at what I was going to do next because my time as a operator doing the job was starting to come to an end. So was looking at what I wanted to do next. I had some coworkers that had gone the MBA route and got in contact with a couple people in different firms, talking to them like, how do I get there? What do I do? What's this? What's consulting? All that other stuff. How do I get where you are? And the common thing was, hey, you should go get an MBA, and kind of got the roadmap because it's a well-trod path from where I am community-wise, work-wise. So just heard is like, hey, you get a 700, you're coming from special operations or special warfare, special forces, pilot, whatever. You get a 700, you're in. Just get the 700 and you'll be fine. So I was like, okay. Well, I'll study for this for a few months, and then I'll get my score, and I'll apply to all the top schools, and they'll love me. Well, so I started studying for it, and quickly realized how far behind I was, especially on the quantitative side. I was a political science undergrad at a state school. I didn't really excel in math at any point in my schooling. Actually, it was kind of a struggle for me for a very long time. And that became very apparent when I started studying for the GMAT. The quantitative side was, I tried to do a bunch of free resources, like using Google, things like that. And I was realizing like, this isn't cutting it. I need something more structured. So as any good millennial does, I Googled best GMAT study Reddit. And then, of course, Target Test Prep is all over that. And it also has a lot of really solid independent reviews. And I was like, I'll check it out. So through this whole process, I was kind of making tabs. I went to gmac.com to like do their little assessment to see where I was. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to take a practice GMAT. I took a bunch of those like small assessments that they have online, and everything was coming back from you need a lot of work to like in the 400s. Yeah. Those were just assessments. None of them were official. And so I was like, doing an official mock would be a waste of time. So that's when I started down the TTP path.
Okay. Yeah. So I think, Jerod, you're, for anyone here who is starting out from scratch, I imagine your path may sound quite similar. back in the day when I was thinking about business school and the GMAT, I mean, my path wasn't totally different. I guess, the only difference is Reddit didn't exist, I don't think.
It's
So,
too bad. Great
yeah,
resource.
so I think that's probably aging me a bit. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is what happens. So a lot of times we'll go out there, it's an overwhelming process, and it is, and there's a lot of information out there. So, looking for reviews like you did is a great idea. GMAT Club and Reddit alike, they have a lot of people who are sharing their experiences. So that's always a really good thing to do. Find people in your shoes, find people who had similar struggles, and find something that works for you. Now, I know you found TTP through Reddit. Did you start off with the trial before like making a final decision? Because we do offer like that 5 days full access trial.
Yeah, I was just based on reviews, I was pretty sure I was going to use it. I went
Right.
through and I did the TTP initial assessment, and I said I want to get a 700 to 720, and then uh, it shot out that initial assessment
Yes.
quiz,
ILP.
and
Right.
it told me you got a long ways to go. I forget exactly what the
Yep.
wording was, but yeah. So I did that trial, and I was the first part of it. I was just like, this is thorough, and this is what I need, because um, what you'll find with a lot of these services is they teach you how to take the GMAT. They teach you how to the tips and tricks of the test,
Right.
which Target Test Prep does as well. But they also go through step by step all the fundamentals that need to go into in order to actually succeed at the test. And I needed that. I needed the fundamentals, not just the tricks and tips, because that would have done me absolutely no good. So the first week when I was just grinding through the first little portion, I was like, okay, I'm actually learning this stuff. I'm like
Right.
getting it. They're explaining it in a way that I can understand. Um, and so this is what I need to do. So I went full bore after that first trial, and like I pretty much kept that subscription up the entire time.
Okay, good. Now, so then I guess it goes without saying when you started TTP. I mean, you said in the 400. So you essentially needed to, I guess, relearn algebra. I'm sure you knew it at some point, maybe back in high school. But yeah, as you said, political science major, you probably took very few math classes in college. So yeah, was it that low where you're like, okay, I actually have to learn how to manipulate equations and do substitution and all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was like the basics weren't even there. Like it was, but Target Test Prep like covered that. So when I went through, I went through everything as prescribed.
Right.
Exactly. I didn't skip a single chapter. So yeah, manipulating the equations, all that other stuff. I had to redo PEMDAS and like re-go through all of that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yep.
So it was, yeah, there wasn't any one subject that I was like, oh yeah, I was pretty good at this. Like there's nothing that I was like, even because this was 10 years ago when I was
Yeah.
even in college. So it's been a while. And then I wasn't confident mathematically to
Right.
begin with. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, those are two really big points. And I think people can get really frustrated with the GMAT really quickly. Um, and a lot of times people assume, well, hey, if I wasn't in engineering major in college or something mathematical, same with my current career, how am I going to deal with the GMAT? And um, I too didn't have a mathematical major. I was actually a history major in college too. So like I was in a similar place you were when the GMAT was introduced to me. So yeah, just so you know, like it can be learned. Now, as you'll find out from Jerod, it can take longer than you would want it to. But I mean, if there's, I mean, he is living, breathing proof that if you stick with it, I mean, he just got into Wharton. That's amazing. Like one of the best possible business schools you can get into. And he's just admitted, I didn't really know how to do algebra prior to my prep. So that's pretty damn cool. And so if you're out there and you're struggling and you're frustrated and you're like, man, this is a high mountain to climb, like just look at what Jerod did. There's others out there like him, but you gotta dig in and be ready for a long process. And if you really want a great GMAT score, go to a great business school. Like just know, obviously, like he said, he can do it. And there's a comment here. I'm an engineer and I have trouble with Quant. So yes, many of us have trouble with Quant, despite having some mathematical backgrounds. So with that in mind, Jerod, do you want to talk a little bit more about the process of going through TTP and kind of like what the ups and downs were like as you were trying to kind of get a grip on this material?
Yeah, sure. So I initially thought my GMAT prep was going to take about even when I was like, oh man, I'm pretty far behind. I thought it was going to take me, about 6 months maybe.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that is the case. I know a lot of people review Target Test Prep and other methods, and they're like, they get there 4 months solid studying. Unfortunately, at the time, I was in the middle of a deployment cycle workup, so I was on the road training, traveling a ton. So I wasn't able to give like a lot of consistent time. So it was a little inconsistent. So my whole timeline was long. Which I'll feed into later on, like if your timeline is long, what you need to do and some of the stuff that
Good.
Jeff told me towards the end. But so I was in the middle of a deployment cycle, traveling a lot. I was like hitting libraries when I could to get Wi-Fi and get Target Test Prep in. But it was learning the stuff from scratch, regardless of your program, is going to be frustrating. So if you don't just have a natural knack for mathematics. So there was some times that I had to, and I ended up figuring out this later, and it worked for me, is at the end of the chapters, I would start making custom tests before even hitting the chapter test. So that's one thing that contributed to how much hourage I put in. But there was no one chapter, especially on the quantitative side, that I was like, I'll just skip through this. So there was a lot of frustration, but as it went on, and I like just spending a couple hours on something and seeing the 1% increase, like, okay, or 2%, I'm like, oh man, this is a lot. But it really started to, once I got like 10, 20% in, it really started to flow a lot better. And things started to click because it's comprehensive, and it builds, each chapter almost builds on each other like mathematics does.
Right.
So it was naturally, I started to feel better, started to do better on the chapter tests as it went on, even if it was a different subject matter, started to like feel it out. There's still a lot of there was ups and downs with frustration. The beginning was pretty rough because I was starting from such a point.
Yeah.
But really around the 20% done, it started to flow a little bit better. But yeah, it took me a few subscriptions in order to make it through, because I started in I think March of 2021.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then it was on and off. It was not consistent. Then finished TTP up, finished it in August, and then I had to go back through and re-review some things. But so I did it all as prescribed, and then August in 2022, I took my first GMAT, and I scored a 660, which I was absolutely stoked about, to be honest. Like I was super pumped. So, but I knew that wasn't quite that score that I needed. And so I ended up, I contacted Jeff, and I contacted a few people, and I think I even made a Reddit post, and I was like, okay, I'm done with Target Test Prep. And now, I'll spend a little money. I'm an enlisted sailor. I don't have like a ton of cash on hand. So I was like, I'll spend a little money. I'll hire a tutor. And and I ended up hiring somebody outside of TTP, and it was, I won't mention the name because the guy was they did refund me. So,
I remember that.
but
Yep.
yeah. So, it ended up being a complete waste of time, and it would have been a waste of money if they didn't refund me. But it kind of screwed me over for round one deadlines.
Right.
I ended up taking the test again after 24 hours of private tutoring. I ended up scoring a 640, which was pretty disheartening. And that was after not doing TTP for a month. And it was bad. I was very frustrated. And the guy was really nice, but he was a generalist tutor. And he was certified or whatever through that particular company to teach GMAT. But the stuff that he was going over, I was like, yeah, I know this. You got it. Like,
yeah.
Let's move forward. So be really careful on your tutor selection. If you're able to go that route, be very mindful. So, yeah.
I mean, I remember we spoke before that. We spoke after that. I think we had been speaking for a while. So I recall the poor experience you had. But yes, I mean, I guess leading up to that point, I mean, you made a couple really interesting points that I just want to highlight before we get to the peak of your story, which is you crushing the GMAT eventually. The course building on itself and feeling like there's a lot to go through. So the thing that in general I think people need to understand is that when they study and when they learn this stuff, just like with anything you're doing in life that you're building on, you're going to get better and you're going to get faster. So like your case, I'm sure when you were getting through like linear and quadratics and then number properties, which is just massive, exponents and roots, inequalities, like the most technical topics in the course, they take a lot out of you, especially if you don't have a background in those topics or haven't seen them in a while. But when you get to the other side of that, and then you're hitting like word problems, rates, work, ratios, things that are, I guess you could say, a little bit more intuitive or normal. Because let's face it, like I didn't learn about unit digit patterns in high school math and college math. I don't know what, I mean, I guess some of us could have learned it for the SAT, maybe. So the point is, you're learning a lot of new stuff. So yeah, once you hit that, it's almost like rolling downhill, and then things in general get faster. And I think that's what happened with you. And yeah, even getting to that 660, as you said, like that's pretty sweet because yeah, if had you taken a practice test, quant wise, it would have been, pretty low. Yeah.
and a waste of time. So
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, just to highlight that point, I mean, there was times that I was messaging Jeff or one of the other people was like, "Is it normal to be this bad? Like, I'm having a really rough time. Like, this can't be normal. Like, I gotta like, there's something wrong here."
Yeah.
And like on Reddit and everything, it's just like, hey, just stick to it, keep going. And another point that I think all the peeps over at Target Test Prep have made videos on is like not worrying about your timing initially.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's huge. Like there was times, and I'm not gonna lie, like in the beginning, especially, like I wasn't hitting my hard tests.
Yeah.
I was not hitting those very well, like very, very rarely. And I like for timing, man, there were sometimes it was taking me 30 minutes to do a single problem. And I was just like pulling my hair out, just like, oh my gosh, they're really difficult problems. They're really challenging and they're really tricky initially. And there's a reason that they're hard. And it's just managing to keep yourself going and keep focusing on that goal. That was big. So but it's a long process for those of us that don't have that skill set. And to touch on, I know you haven't mentioned, I don't know if you want to go over the verbal portion, but
yes, feel free.
Yeah. So quantitative was obviously a struggle. Native English speaker, and generally a pretty good test taker. like as far as like before the GMAT, especially on the English side, like anything that was teaching or like testing sentence correction, things like that. So I was like, this is going to be my I don't even really need to study for this, but I was going to go through all the Target Test Prep sentence correction anyway.
Yeah.
And it turns out my whole method of being successful at this point on those standardized tests does not work. So I was doing everything by ear because I'm a good writer. I'm a good reader.
We spoke about this. Yeah.
Yeah. And I could point out a sentence and be like, that sentence, it doesn't look right. And that sentence does look right. And I was good at that. And the GMAT will make the most jacked up sentence correct and the most correct sentence incorrect. So the Target Test Prep, much like the mathematics, goes through very step by step. And I mean, that was enlightening for me as well. Like the sentence structure stuff. Like I learned a lot, and I'm a native English speaker that is generally pretty good at that stuff. And the reasoning portion that came a lot more naturally for me. But the sentence correction, I definitely needed to spend some time on and work pretty hard at that. So yeah, I mean, and it ended up paying dividends at the end because that was one of the big things that carried my score was the verbal portion.
Yes, I know you crushed verbal. Another interesting point you brought up, and we find this from students a decent amount. They are concerned, like, okay, I'm doing good on easy and medium questions, and then like, you only need to get in the course about 60% correct on the hards. That's the benchmark. But they get very concerned when they don't, right? And yes, that's part of it, hitting the benchmark. But the other part of it is how you're learning from what you're doing wrong. So in your case, you take 30 minutes to do a question. Yes, that's a long time. But if you're learning from that, you're developing your skills and your processes, and then going back, reading through the solution, asking yourself how you could do better the next time you see a question like that. Like, that's part of the process. It's not, and that's learning in general. It's not this scientific thing where it's like, well, if I don't hit X, Y, and Z as score targets, especially in our course, that I will or won't get a particular score, because there's so much surrounding that. And I'm sure you noticed it's what you're doing when you're done with these questions and reviewing and taking notes and making flashcards and going back and reviewing. It all kind of adds up to what you need on test day. I mean, would you kind of agree with that as far as your process through TTP?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah, it was that review was pretty big. And another point is, because it took me so, and this will go into my jump from, I saw a thing from Antonio saying that building up from a 620 to 700s. So for me, the big journey, the big thing was getting that 660. That was huge for me. Like, going from what's estimated, and you have to take it with a grain of salt because none of it was official, but from probably in the low 400s or in the mid 400s maybe. And going from that to the 660 was the biggest jump. Like, that was huge. Going from the 660 to the 750, that was like, timeline wise, the least amount. But that was like, that's one thing that I'll say about Target Test Prep is you get that baseline. If you go through the entire thing, you get that baseline that you're capable of getting right in there if you're going on the expert path or whatever. Once you have all those steps in there, sometimes it's just tweaking some. Sometimes for me, it was going back and reviewing something that I hadn't seen for a year because I'd been going through that for so long.
I remember that. Yeah.
And Jeff was asking me, like, over email and talking to him. He's like, hey, have you reviewed like number properties? Have you reviewed these earlier chapters? And it's like, no, I went through them like a long time ago. Or I went through them a year ago. I figured it out. I've been reviewing it, and it's like, you might want to go back through and review them. It's been a year. It's like,
Yeah, I remember in our first session, and so yes, Jerod also did private tutoring with us. We worked together on the tail end of his prep, and just to fill in those blanks. But yes, I recall there was, and that's actually such a huge point, man, because when we met, so I knew your situation. I knew you were kind of stuck at the 660. So we met and we were doing some problems, and it wasn't adding up. I was, because a 660 is a very good score. It's not like you were at a, at a 450, and there were things you didn't know, and I was like, you got to go back and redo this stuff. Like some of it was like verbatim stuff that we had in TTP. So in general, this is a TTP point or a general study point. Don't let topics get away from you for too long. And I know it's tough. And I know you're going to have weaknesses when you go into your GMAT. Like it's going to happen. Like you can't be perfect everywhere. It's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole. You fix one thing and then another thing pops up. But find strategic ways to stay with your review. Flashcards are a great way. Notes. In fact, we actually have a flashcard app in TTP now. We didn't have it when you were a student, but we've kind of created decks of flashcards. Students can use it to make their own, but we've created decks. So that's an also, like, you want to go back and study some things from linear and quadratic equations that you last truly looked at 4 months ago. You can do that. And yeah, I imagine that was a big part of you getting back up to speed, getting you to kind of climb the hill, from the 660 to the 750. So, how did you like conduct those review sessions once it became clear? What was it you were doing, beyond us working together to get back up to speed with those topics?
yeah, that was the big thing. Was I mean, we did do some sessions of private tutoring, but the biggest thing was pointing out, like, hey, like, go back through number properties, like specific areas in number properties, and I can't remember exactly what specific chapters, but and then I reviewed it, and it was all the rules. There's a million little rules
Yeah.
that will make your life so much, like, make your problem solving so much faster. And it's hard to keep those in your head. I mean, I'm 4 months removed from it now, and I probably can't remember half of the number properties rules, but like that is important. Like staying on top of that, going back through, and so yeah, that was the biggest thing was Jeff pointing out, like, number properties for me. Go
Right.
back to it, like reread those chapters, make some custom tests, go on. GMAT Club has phenomenal question banks. I was going through that hardcore in order to supplement some of the stuff, like going through official questions, and just reviewing those flashcards that I'd made earlier on, but that I neglected to
Yeah.
review.
Of course.
Just thinking, it was like, I went through it already. I'm good. But so that was probably the biggest thing. And yeah. And then, advice on like a few days.
Oh, so you see the question. I was gonna tell you
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Sleep. Try your best just to sleep well.
Yeah.
Make sure everything is just lined up as much as you can, so you have to do as little thinking as possible, like right up before the test. I didn't study really at all for a couple, like, I want to say like a day or two.
Yeah.
I
That's
didn't
about
even look
right.
at I didn't even look at anything.
Did you did you look at notes or anything, or literally nothing?
I looked at notes like a couple days prior, but I had taken a mock about a week before my official test, and I did it in person because I did 2 online tests, and one of the online tests, a dog was barking outside the window incessantly for about the last 10 minutes of my quantitative section.
That sounds
So
horrible.
that was normally like pretty chill with hearing dogs bark, but when you're trying to put all your CPU into doing the test, it really takes a toll. So I decided to do an in-person
That's good.
test at a center, which I would recommend because it worked for me. I mean,
Right.
um, I don't think it was necessarily easy. I know there's rumors easier or harder.
Right.
I don't know if it was or not. I scored a lot better, so who knows? But
That's amazing. The
so,
dog is amazing. I mean,
oh my gosh, it
was
was.
that was was that a dog that normally barked outside your window, or is this a
No, it was a
unpleasant surprise?
dog we were watching. It was a friend's dog. And I didn't actually tell him, like, your dog almost ruined me.
Wow. So it
So
could
we
have
were
been the end
watching
of
it.
you
I was
with
like,
with that dog.
I was very frustrated. But yeah, so the dog, that's a whole saga. But yeah, I did it in person. Just tried to sleep as well as possible, staying active. I know it's hard with full-time job. I know it better than as well as anybody with deployment workup and
Right.
like and deployment. Um, is just trying to stay active, stay physically fit, uh,
Right.
and as at minimum, I usually lifted a lot of weights and stuff like that. And I'd run for 20 minutes. I just do a fast run for 20 minutes because I
Right.
didn't have time for a whole lot else.
Did
So yeah,
did you well, so it sounds like you were working up until test day, basically, if that's correct. Did you like that? Because it kept your mind like, because the problem is, right, if you're like, "Ah, I'm gonna take 3 days off before my test," then you're kind of just sitting around waiting for the test to happen.
yeah.
But did you work up until your test, or did you take like the day off before?
Um, I did have work, but fortunately, I like have had a lot of flexibility towards the end
Right.
of time in the Navy.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I think I just went in, like, checked emails and like did a few other administrative tasks, just keeping my mind off of things. I might have ran a drill or two as an instructor, but
Right.
really just trying to keep it chill and keep my mind off the test.
Good. Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. Because yeah, I find that you got to do something, and keeping things as normal-ish as possible is usually nice. Because again, if you change your whole schedule or like randomly change your eating habits or your habits related to physical activity, like if you normally jog a couple miles and then like 2 days for the test you're like, oh, I'm gonna jog 5 or 6 miles. Yeah, I would say you don't want to do anything that's going to kind of throw you off from your daily routine. It sounds like
Yeah,
you kind
I,
of stuck to what you did.
I had this whole little routine that I would do before the mocks and then my first two online tests.
Yep.
And I would go out and I would run, and then I would like take an ice bath, and I would like do all these things. I didn't do that before my in person one where I got the 750. So I mean, figure out a nice little routine. Like I actually kind of like that routine, but yeah,
Right.
just something to get your head in the game and get ready. And just I know some people are like really jittery before, so maybe you
Right.
don't want to be loading up on coffee. I tend to go downhill pretty quickly after the first, like I did quantitative first, and I
Hmm.
just be like the focus on like having to read every single word. So I would drink coffee and I would be like try and keep myself focused in the game. But that's gonna be a personal preference.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with caffeine. That's definitely because yeah, you can go up and then you can crash. Something you mentioned, which is interesting. So looks like verbal, even just based on your score, is the stronger part for you. So you made a conscious, and people ask this a lot, and I honestly don't have an exact answer for people because it's a really personal decision, but I think people can take some insight from you. Um, you made the conscious decision to do quant first. So what you did is the topic that I think was a bit more strenuous for you. You felt like you would do as you were most fresh, and then because that maybe that helped you get in the groove and then you were good for verbal. Like, was that your thought process, or was there something more to it?
Um, I knew that mentally I could bounce back from quantitative, and just like, and that was a big thing. It's like just the mental game.
Right.
And I was able to like, so I knew I could bounce back. I knew that was going to take a lot more brain power for me to do. And even on test day, when you're getting up there with your scores and you're getting a lot of these questions right, the questions start getting really tricky, and so it starts to create a oh my gosh, I'm not getting any of these. And I
Right. Yep.
on most of my mocks, even on my better quantitative mocks, I was getting like probably upwards of half the questions wrong sometimes, like
Oh
10
wow.
like 10 to 15 questions wrong consistently, even when I was getting a 660.
All right. It's like
um
30%, 40% wrong.
yeah. And so regardless of my quantitative score, I was getting the same number of questions wrong. So
Right.
that's something to like, that I was like, what the heck? I'm like getting 12. I got 12 questions wrong on this one, and then 10 questions wrong on this one. But the 12 questions, I'm getting a better score. So I knew I could bounce back from that mentally. So that's why I did quantitative first.
Yep.
And I knew verbal, I could cruise through verbal at that point after going through target test prep and all that other, all the other stuff. So I just felt better just utilizing as much brain power on the quantitative side.
When you were in the test itself, because obviously, again, quant was an issue for you. Were you? I mean, you must have been feeling good. At any point, were you trying to guess where you were at in the quant, or were you just trusting, like, okay, I'm doing well. I feel good about this. I'm just going to keep moving, as opposed to like trying to figure out exactly where you were at? Because if you try to do that and then you mistakenly say, well, I'm not doing well, well, then there goes the verbal section, because you're going to be kind of out of it for that section. So were you doing any of that on your GMAT, or just kind of taking it one question at a time?
I tried not to. I think I did a pretty good job of not doing that. Earlier mocks, it was a lot more guessing where I was. Earlier mocks or actual tests. So I think I did a pretty good job of just taking it for what it was. And at this point, I was a almost like I was like a year and a half into
Yeah.
a GMAT study. Um, I had told my wife multiple times that I was done with this thing. I'll just take the 660. I'll just roll the dice on these schools. Hopefully they like my story.
Yeah.
um, Turns out that, I mean, that only gets you so far for like my vets.
Correct.
My
Yes.
veterans are in there, and like you're a decorated combat veteran, like all this other stuff, special operations pilot. And it's gotten a lot more competitive.
Yes.
The word is out among U.S. military that this is a
Yeah.
route. It's not a 700 and your golden ticket. You
Right.
have to be those scores have gotten a lot more competitive this year in the last couple of years.
Yep.
So that's a point for if there's any vets in the audience.
Well, I'm sure they'll be watching this. And
Yeah.
another thing I was thinking of, and I know we talked about this a lot, and I say this to students all the time. There's, you mentioned, actually, and I should have brought this up before. You mentioned number properties, for example, all those like little rules that you can look at while you're learning and say, like, and you don't need to get into specifics here, but that, they won't show up or you won't need them. But when you do know those rules and you do encounter stuff testing you on them, and it doesn't just have to be with number properties, but in general, did you find that you hit a few of those on the test and you were like, man, this is great? Like, because I really know how to do this question, and almost feeling like without that rule, it would be a much more difficult question to answer. Did you find you had a few of those that really boosted your confidence?
Yeah, I don't remember specifically. I mean, it was in December at this point. But yes,
Right.
yeah, for sure.
Okay.
There
Yeah.
there is so much that you're going to study for the GMAT that you're not going to actually see on
Correct.
the
Yes.
test, but you could see it. And when it does happen, you're going to want that. You're going to want those skills. Like
Yep.
it's like without a doubt. Like you can. you can get screwed pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
If you just skipped over something, it's like, oh, that's a kind of a rare question to get. Like,
Yep.
I'm gonna skip over it, but then you all of a sudden you get that rare question, and that can really affect things. And Antonio, um, yeah, like I, it, I don't remember. I bought the enhanced
Score
review
report. Yeah,
score
ESR.
report.
Yep.
Yeah, the enhanced score report, and I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure I got 12 questions wrong.
Right. So
So
probably a
that
bunch
key
of hard ones.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But they start getting real obscure, or they can, or you can get stuff that's just like, but they do spread it out like between different subjects, but even subjects within those subjects, there's stuff
Yeah.
that you just can't get around it. You have to memorize some of these things.
Yeah, that's I mean, man, like you're preaching to the choir. Like that's such a good point. And we get the question all the time, like, hey, my test is in 3 weeks. Like, what's the most important thing I need to study for? And it's like, well, to Jared's point, it's like it's all important, but then it's not. Because
Yeah,
like it's important because it could be on your test, and it's not because it's not necessarily going to be on your test. And just one obscure question can make or can turn the scales of your score because it's only, there's not a lot. It's a 31 question quant test. There's not many questions, but yet there's so many different topics. So yes, knowing those obscure things, not trying to game it, as I like to say, don't spin the roulette wheel to figure out what topics you should skip or shouldn't, um, because there's going to be enough stuff that you're going to get wrong for various reasons. Like it's just you just don't know how to do a question because you don't. You make a careless mistake. You pick a trap answer. Okay, you get those wrong, but you want the other stuff to at least be in your wheelhouse so you have a shot, and that's how you get a Q47 or higher, um like you did. So yeah, man, that is what makes the GMAT so hard. I think we can agree that the majority of the content, as you saw and are proof of, is super learnable if you put in the time, but there's just a boatload of it, so you gotta do what you did. I mean, not everyone has to spend a year, but you went through the process, you circled back, you re-reviewed, you filled in gaps, and then you had to give it a couple shots, and then eventually you got exactly what you needed to get. So that's, yeah, man, that's really really good advice. Outside of that, in general, obviously a lot of people are going to see this. They're going to see that you went from a 400 to a 750, although not technically, but we can
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
guesstimate. Um, what kind of like just practical advice would you give to people who are starting out the process, seeing the mountain they're about to climb or need to climb to get to where they need to get to? Like, what kind of practical advice would you give those students?
So like I mentioned before, the biggest hurdle was getting to that 660. That was the biggest grind. But I forget. There's an author that talks about it somewhere, that talks about like you spend 90% of your time getting to like a basic level, and then it's like 10% or something like that. I'm butchering it, but to get
Yeah,
that big jump, it's usually like a lot less of an effort to get that big final jump. So I'm really glad that I didn't quit at a 660 and like call it that, because that is a good score. It'll get you in some, it'll get most people into a decent school. Um, but the willingness to put in the extra few months, or put in the extra few hours or dozen hours, or whatever, to make that final jump, because that was huge. That was a huge jump from 660 to
I know.
750. I was blown away, and I was
I
like,
know. I was too.
holy
I'm
cow. Like, and that was sitting there with Jeff, and him basically saying, review things, go back over this stuff. Like, there was no secrets that he was telling me. There's no, like, if you end up, if you're able to like hire as a tutor like Jeff or any of the other Target Test Prep people, I can't speak for the others, but there wasn't any magical secrets they were holding back. that weren't already in Target Test Prep. It's all there, and it was literally going through and reviewing.
Yeah. Well, I
And
think, yeah, I think a lot of what we did together was, we developed a rapport, and I was kind of coaching you through things, um, and helping you see things a certain way. But yeah, you had those base level skills, and they were there, and you were putting in the work, and you were putting in the time. So, we were just kind of connecting dots together.
yeah, yeah,
Sometimes you need to hear that stuff.
yeah. That was the biggest help for me, is him just literally saying, hey, like, look at this, like, you learn this, like, this is how you apply it. Like, okay, yeah, you're right, and that is a tremendous help. I mean, that was
Yeah.
a help. I don't want to diminish that, but just to the point where Target Test Prep itself, like, it's all there,
Right.
and yeah, just sticking with it. And it's like, for somebody that has zero quant background, starting from scratch, there's no way around it. It's probably going to be kind of frustrating. It was really frustrating at points. I questioned, when I was hearing from fellow veterans or other people that I've met along the way, and I questioned them, like, oh, I need to get that magic 700. That's easy. And I was like,
I know.
this isn't as easy as everyone's making it out to be, or like, at
Right.
least the people that I know. This is not that easy. This is very, very difficult. I'm having a rough time.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just dedicating the time and just being willing to do that next test, do that next mock, just do one more.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's thinking that you just need to get an extra 40 points from your 660 seems like this easy task, but as you said, that's a big, even though it's just 40 points, even though you just went from a 400 to a 660 or whatever, that last 40, it's tough because you're going from pretty darn good to really darn good, and it takes a special leap. It takes a special way of thinking about these questions. But also back to your point, and that if you go back and watch these interviews I've done with everybody, including what we're talking about here, like, a very common thread, and it's not the only common thread, is just the perseverance to understand that it takes time and energy. Yes, there are people who can jump into their GMAT prep and in 2 months get a 750. Those people exist. But by and large, that's not the norm. And so you can't compare yourself to those people or anyone. And to Jerod's point, like, other vets being like, yeah, just get that 700. I got it. Don't, try to avoid that, because everyone's on a unique journey. Everyone's on a unique path. I mean, again, Jerod was sitting here. He almost went with his 660. If he did that, is he getting into a top 25 school? Probably. But he's not getting into Wharton today on
Yeah.
March 23rd. So, like, you just got to understand that things will work out the way they need to, as long as you're willing and able to put in the work, as long as you're flexible. Like, you did this for a year. I don't know if you had to push off well, you definitely had to push off round one plans. I don't know if you had to push a whole cycle or not.
No, fortunately I started this whole process what I thought was early, and
Right.
I knew I was getting out of the Navy. Actually, I'm getting out of the Navy tomorrow.
Oh,
Yeah,
double congrats.
yeah. Thank you. It's a good time. Like, but it's definitely a long journey. And actually, this goes to KP's point on here. Like, Wharton, I don't know. I'm not in administration in Wharton, but I have 10 years work experience. I'm 32 years old. I'm a non-traditional. I'm be a few years older than most of my classmates. So
Right.
take it for what it's worth.
Right.
And I know people that are older than me that have gotten. I know somebody that's way older than me that's at Stanford. That's 42, but he's another non-traditional.
Oh, wow. Starting at Stanford right now?
No, he's graduating this year.
Wow.
But he's a veteran. He's a veteran, non-traditional background. Yeah, I was like, you did the full-time program? He's like, yeah.
That's wild. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, yeah, that So I did start the whole process pretty early and thought I would be done with it in 6 months. But with training and all that other stuff, yeah. So I did have to push off because I was planning on doing early applications round one. I wanted to do all
Right.
that, and even I was able to put a lot of time into Target Test Prep right before I ended up taking the GMAT. And so thought I was still going to be able to line that up, and you got to be flexible. Like round two isn't bad. Like you can still get it. Even you can get into good schools in round three. So yeah, I'm glad I didn't just stop at 660 and say, well, I need to get these round one applications in.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
and that's also a really good point, Jerod. I tell people all the time, like, be the best, submit the best version of yourself. If that means round two, I mean, yeah, I mean, if that means round two, do it. If you, I mean, like, Jerod with a 660 in round one is inferior to Jerod with a 750 round two. I think that goes without saying. So yeah, you definitely made the right call on that. So yeah, I mean, there you go, Wharton Admit. So it's showing that that was by far the right move.
yeah, and um, yeah, just being willing to put that grind in. Like I mentioned before, Jeff, my wife, was like, dude, just do another one. And I know it was kind of painful for her because I was sitting there spending so much time in my office, just sitting there, like
Yep, that's good.
hour
You
after
need,
hour.
yeah. I mean,
So
it sounds like she was a good supporter of what you needed,
yeah,
and that's helpful too.
yeah. So yeah, it's a grind, but you can if I can get that far, then really I don't know anyone that can, because I'm telling you that Quant was rough.
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree. So yes, another point, start early. Start earlier than you would think. If you think you're starting earlier, start earlier.
Yeah,
If you think you're going to go to business school in 3 years and you know it, start now. I mean,
you,
that's fantastic
you could always take
advice.
the GMAT and it stays for what, five
5 years,
years.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So
You
you
could
got
always
plenty
take
of
it early. Yeah.
exactly. Well, this was great. I just do want to share a few things about TTP, and then I'll send Jerod off. I know he has fun things going on that make me jealous.
Shredding
Uh,
some nails.
yeah, exactly, man. It sounds great. So let me pull up just a few slides about Target Test Prep. So again, I will reiterate, we are running a sale, and actually, I can't even find the right thing here. Um, we're running a sale for the rest of the month, and it is going to be 20% off any Target Test Prep plan. Okay. It's for our flexible plan, it's for our 6 month plan, it's for our 4 month plan. So that's now to basically the 31st. And so if you guys are interested in Target Test Prep, you can check out the trial. You can also just go ahead and purchase that plan. I am trying to find this PowerPoint. For some reason, it's not showing up. But yeah, it's a really, really good deal on our courses. And if you have any questions, certainly you can reach out to, me directly. Looks like this PowerPoint isn't going to load, so I'll just talk about it. Um, and we can help you out. But the full access trial is something that will allow you to see our entire course. So you can certainly take full advantage of that. Um, and I guess that's it. Do you have any other parting words, Jerod, for anybody?
No, just try not to just keep those goals in mind. In those trenches. So, and also 30 isn't that scary. I'm not that old.
No, I mean, I won't tell you how old I am, but 30 is not that old. So yes, don't be scared of being 30. So thank you, Jerod. I appreciate it. It's always exciting to talk to successful students from TTP. Again, everybody, March 20 is the discount code, 20% off TTP. Jerod, enjoy your journeys, and don't be a stranger. I want to hear how things work out with you at Wharton. And thanks everybody for attending, and we'll certainly be back soon.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, bye, everybody.